Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a truly mind-bending concept. We usually just think of geometry as math, right? Just lines, squares, and circles on a chalkboard. But what if the shapes around us aren't just math, but actually languages of control? What if they're tools used to build social hierarchies or even cosmic blueprints to translate the divine? We're exploring the fascinating research of Mark Edward Shard today. And as you'll see, the physical geometry of our world is absolutely far from innocent.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the myth of neutral shapes, then see how geometry is actually weaponized. Next, we'll learn to read the language of form, move on to explore sacred geometry, and finally, talk about decolonizing space. It's quite a journey.
Section 1. The Myth of Neutral Shapes. Questioning our spatial reality.
I want you to take a second right now and just look around the room you're in. Notice the right angles, the symmetry of the doors, maybe the grid of the ceiling or the floor. Are those shapes truly neutral? We're basically taught from day one that a square is just an innocent square. But historically, European aesthetic traditions elevated specific types of geometry, things like perfect symmetry and proportion, to define what is rational and what is civilized, while aggressively pushing other geometric forms to the absolute margins.
So the crucial point is, geometry is not neutral. As researcher Mark Edward Shard so powerfully puts it, it's a cultural technology used to classify bodies, organize space, encode cosmologies, and legitimize political orders. For centuries, these ideals of symmetrical, orderly form have been mobilized to draw a hard, physical line separating so-called civilization from primitivity.
Moving to Section 2, Geometry as a Weapon, the Material Reality of Euclidean Lines.
During the Enlightenment, European aesthetic regimes heavily promoted Euclidean geometry. Think rigid grids, straight lines, strict symmetry. They framed this as the absolute hallmark of objective beauty and civilized rationality. But listen, this was not just about art or architecture. This Euclidean mindset was literally weaponized in colonial statecraft. It became a practical tool to classify cultures, dominate landscapes, and enforce strict physical control over colonized populations who happened to use different spatial logics.
300. 300 meters, to be exact. I really want that number to sink in. That is not a random measurement. It is a highly precise, calculated instrument of control used in mid-20th century urban planning.
In post-1950 Johannesburg, apartheid planners deliberately used these exact 300-meter swaths of vacant land, which they called buffer strips, to enforce absolute physical partitioning between racialized groups. Black townships, like Soweto, were engineered using uniform hyperlinear Euclidean grids. And why? Because that specific, rigid geometry facilitated panoptic police visibility, meaning constant all-seeing surveillance and military containment. The geometry of the city was quite literally engineered to oppress.
Section 3. Reading the Language of Form, Contrasting Spatial Logics.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast we need to understand. On one side, Eurocentric or Euclidean geometry is linear, it's hierarchical, and it's built on rigid grids. On the flip side, indigenous and African spatial logics are incredibly different. They are often fractal, recursive, relational, and decentralized. But for centuries, Eurocentric frameworks completely misread these highly sophisticated African mathematical architectures, just brushing them off as irregular, intuitive, or simply primitive.
Let me give you a specific, amazing example of this genius. Traditional Biela settlements in Zambia are designed using recursive fractal architecture. Basically, they feature a wide outer ring of circular structures that scales down recursively into smaller and smaller concentric rings, all the way to the family quarters and individual altars in the center. This isn't just random building. It's a direct socio-spiritual geometry. It maps relational proximity to ancestors, distributes community authority, and represents cosmic continuity. I mean, it is incredibly sophisticated math.
Which brings us to a vital concept for this whole explainer: critical geometric literacy, or CGL. It extends Melissa Stain's concept of critical diversity literacy right into the domain of physical form. Simply put, CGL is the capacity to read geometric and formal structures as texts of power, difference, and possibility. It gives us the vocabulary to literally read the physical world around us.
CGL operates on a few core criteria. It shows us that power constructs difference through form, and that unequal value is assigned to certain shapes. But here is the kicker, and why this matters so much today. Oppression is still current in modern design. Even in today's digital UX design, mainstream interfaces heavily privilege linear,
grid-based layouts that reflect Western cognitive preferences, while relational spatial logics get left out entirely. These hegemonic ideals are still hiding in plain sight, just pretending to be neutral.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 4. Sacred Geometry and Metatron. Translating the Cosmos.
Okay, so think about this for a second. If geometry can be used to control bodies and enforce earthly borders, how does it handle the infinite? How in the world do finite human minds use shapes to translate, map, and process a boundless, overwhelming cosmos?
Well, enter Metatron's cube. This is an incredibly dense, visually striking symbol packed with meaning. It's constructed from 13 interlocking circles that actually contain all 5 Platonic solids within their lines. It visually holds massive multiplicity within one overarching unity. In the mystical traditions associated with it, this cube embodies the intense tension between the infinite, generative, fluid potential of the divine and the stabilized, structured form that human consciousness can actually receive and process.
This ties directly into what the source calls the Enochic messenger-scribe paradigm, which comes from ancient texts like 3 Enoch. In this tradition, the human figure Enoch is taken to the divine realm and transformed into Metatron, the celestial scribe. His job is basically a 3-step process. First, he experiences an overwhelming divine threshold encounter. Second, he mediates and translates that blinding cosmic luminosity. And third, he stabilizes that knowledge into structured geometric form, like the cube, so that finite human minds aren't totally destroyed by it.
And this ancient scribal function is surprisingly relevant for us today. It actually gives modern scholars a participatory framework to engage with profound spiritual or visionary encounters. By acting as a sort of messenger scribe, researchers can translate the raw, overwhelming emotions of these experiences into structured, coherent ideas. It's a powerful way to validate these alternative ways of knowing without romanticizing them or just waving them away as irrational.
Section 5. Decolonizing Space and Knowledge. Reclaiming Geometry.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the very geometric resources once used to marginalize people are actually being reclaimed for epistemic disobedience today. African fractal geometry, which was dismissed for centuries by colonial powers as primitive, is now being celebrated and reappropriated in cutting-edge contemporary architecture and digital design. Reading these spaces with CGL allows us to challenge those old Eurocentric hierarchies and prove once and for all that geometric rationality belongs to everyone.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. I want you to look around your room again, look out the window at the city or town you live in. Once you take the red pill of critical geometric literacy and learn to read the language of form, you literally cannot unsee it. What hidden power dynamics, what histories of control, or what beautiful reclaimed spatial logics are encoded in the very geometry around you. Keep questioning the shapes of your world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.